I know, I'm just doing it so I can see myself.
So I started doing that. I find it's pretty easy because this thermos, and it's like it's right next to me. And if my mouth gets a little dry, it works for me.
For the hour, I used to like 1 on, needing like full power, and then 20 off, 20 on, 20 off.
Can I do something for you?
And it's good to get over there, and it's so good.
Are you going to try this one more time?
To Colombia. Long time ago. Right now, I just left my full-time job in June, and I'm working very part-time because I'm trying to restart my woodworking, furniture making business. So, mostly I'm going to concentrate on making doors.
So when we walk out, we will go.
They're cool, they're very pretty, they're very unusual.
Across the street.
But they're practical because you need them. But many years ago, my son was about 6, and we built a new house, and I found this incredible 9-foot, 4-foot wide, 9-foot tall antique door from a church or something. It was really beautiful. And we had the architect build it into the front of this house we were building. So it was the first morning that we lived in this house. And he came down the hallway and I heard him snap. He said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." He said, "We get to look at that door every day." And he was so happy about it. And a few years ago, I remembered that and thought, we all need to look at something beautiful in our house that's very practical every day. So I started building doors that are really cool. Doors, I build them from the ground up. I don't like go and get doors and then decorate them. I actually build the door. And they're very beautiful. Oh yeah.
That's all right?
Many years afterwards, I decided to do this. Sometimes I find information from like monastery doors, like from India, like Indian monastery doors.
Yeah, not many.
Or
I'm going to learn from you.
sometimes I look at craftsman style doors and I find inspiration. But they're very decorative, they're very beautiful. Oh, okay. I'll find one. I always have a hard time finding pictures. I think I do have one. That's pretty easy to find.
So I have to sell my car.
Yes.
But it was fun. It was fun for a year.
Let me see if I can find this. Otherwise, I have to go onto Facebook. And I do other things as well, but oh, come on. I'm going to have to look. Oh, no, here it is.
Right, okay.
That's one.
Super Bowl is on the
So if you, so I will incorporate, sometimes I stain them, sometimes I paint them, I will incorporate metal into them. I call this my craftsman. What did I call this one? An homage to New Orleans craftsman or something. But yeah, so I design them and then I build it. Yeah, but, you know, so somebody gets to look at the store every day. So that's what you do. So I'm trying
No.
to
I know,
sell
I
more.
remember, I can't say for
So
sure, but
currently I work very part-time, high-end women's boutique clothing. And I am going to make
that's nice.
2 doors for the
Drury
fitting.
Lane,
And then I'm gonna put plaques
not my
that
doing,
say,
but my
who
ex-wife.
built the doors and I will build them for
We
you.
were charter
And I have
members.
another place that
In other words,
work
we
with the
committed
designer.
to so many plays, and because we were
I will
right
give
from the
her
beginning, picture that it
pictures
opened.
and digital
How
portfolio
got,
so she can try. So I'm gonna try.
I was not kidding. We're
To do this, because I have a workshop, I've had a workshop for years, I've built furniture, I've built all kinds of things. I have a woodworking workshop, yes, in my basement. Over the years, I've gone no, it's cold. In fact, last week, I'm not kidding you, this is what I did. I put my coat on backwards. Oh, because it was cold. This is what I do, this is what I did. Yeah. Like a little blanket. This way.
We don't buy do this.
Oh, do they?
Like retirees, avoid the winds.
Oh.
Writing seeds.
Oh, I see, so there's no surprise.
I showed up and it was
So
like
that's what I'm
15
going to
people
try
at the
doing
library,
now.
and
I take it seriously.
the room was over 75.
I take my craft serious.
I'll laugh at your jokes.
Yeah, well, I'm tipsy too, so everything's better with this.
From photo and writing to public relations to this. Well, I graduated from Columbia with photo writing, and then I went into public relations. Well, now, back then, they did not have a public relations degree. So they told you to take a writing degree and a photo degree.
Writing is like writing.
Like, yes.
But I think you put what is related to photo.
No, well, it is related to photo when you work for a company and do public relations. So that's what I did. And then I was in sales for a while, which is similar to public relations. And so when my son, again, was 18 months old,
One and done, I understand.
for 1 year, my house was too clean. I didn't know what to do. I had this baby that I was trying
Okay, just
so my husband's was a retired cabinet woodworker. So I walked in one day with the baby and said, "You're going to teach me how to use all those tools." And he said, "You're a girl."
Oh, right.
I said, "I have a
yeah, I understand.
because that's how I used to joke with him, because he'd say crazy things like that. And then he looked at me and he said, "Well,
Whatever.
neither of my 2 sons want to learn, so I might as well teach."
All right, everybody. Welcome in. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate the spirited applause. For any of you who don't know me, my name is Patty Swanson. I'm the founder and executive director of Chicago for Chicagoans. I started this project 6 years ago, and I never thought I would be here today with so many fans and friends in the audience and new faces as well. So if you've never been here before, please thank you for being here. Come back. All of our events are offered on a pay-what-you-can basis because we believe in making history, and especially Chicago history, accessible to everyone. The only way that model works, though, is for those of you who are feeling a little bit more fiscally stable to throw some money our way. So we have a million ways you can donate. We take cash, check, credit card, Venmo, firstborn babies, anything I can take to the bank and try to hawk, I will. That's the life of a nonprofit. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. I filled out a lot of paperwork for that honor. So if you deduct donations from your taxes, you can do that. Ask me for a little form. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for being vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated yet, you are watching online. And I encourage you to do so because we are a history organization and history has proven time and time again that vaccinations work. So please, if you're not yet vaccinated, get vaccinated. And if you are sitting here in front of me, I know you've had a minimum of 2 shots. So thank you guys so much. Give yourselves a round of applause for science. I'm going to stall for time a little bit as we wait for a couple more people to grab some drinks. Not really, but I will talk a little bit about our series. So the theme this year is Chicago Obscura. We have an amazing lineup of speakers talking about basically all the stuff these nerds researched for 2 years when they couldn't give walking tours. So it's a really interesting smattering. We have everything from the history of public housing to sea monsters to tonight, to great literary figures and everything in between. So please keep coming back. Every person that attends in person or virtually qualifies for our punch cards. So if you don't know what that is or you don't have one, come ask me. But basically, if you come to 6 events, you get a limited edition artist print mailed to you, which is pretty exciting, actually. So keep coming back. Come learn new things about your city. I think that's all I could possibly say. Again, if you have some money to spare, throw us a donation. And without further ado, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. I have known this person for quite some time. I'm going to go ahead and say she's taught me every single thing I know about Lake Michigan. I didn't grow up in Chicago, but Sam did, actually in the city limits, too. I'm not talking like Schaumburg. No offense to the Schaumburgians. But truly, Sam calls herself a folklorist, and I think that's dead on. Everything from ghost stories to legends to mystical happenings and a ton of facts about Lake Michigan as well are all things that I've learned from her. So I'm really excited to watch her share those with you today. Really interesting collection of stories she's assembled about our great inland sea. So I'm going to let her take it away, and thank you guys again for being here.
Yay! Hot dog.
Okay.
Yay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, I am Sam Prestigiacomo. Yes, that is very long and hard to say, so don't worry about it. I am a hobby folklorist and a collaborator for Chicago for Chicagoans. Patty and I have done a couple tours in the past that I really hope we get the chance to do again for you someday. And basically what I do is I collect spooky stories, and I have a lot of really fun ones to share tonight. I was a little nervous because I am a couple years out of practice of doing this, but I forgot that Patty tends to assemble really great people, and I already feel like I'm just a little tipsy sharing stories with friends, so this is actually exactly what getting a drink with me is like. I'm just going to talk a lot about really horrible things that have happened. But to start out, I am going to talk a little broadly about Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan is a glacial lake and the second largest Great Lake by volume. Something that I think people not from the city don't really appreciate is that when they called this region the Great Lakes region, when European colonizers came and first saw them, there was not a word to describe what the Great Lakes are, because they are not really lakes. They are literally giant inland freshwater seas, and there is no other system like that anywhere in the world. So we are really lucky to have them, but I think we also don't appreciate how strange and magnificent they are. So I also included an image here that is a scale map of Lake Michigan on top of the European continent. And as you can see, by surface area, Lake Michigan is actually larger than many countries in Europe, which puts it in perspective for you. And I have also experienced having people come to the city who see the lake for the first time and get really confused and think that they've ended up on a coast. Because people know that there's a big lake in Chicago, but they don't really understand that it is a sea, and that a lot of amazing maritime history has happened here. So anyway, I love Lake Michigan. A couple more things about her. She has an average depth of 279 feet, but at her deepest point, the deepest recorded point of Lake Michigan is actually 923 feet down. Very, very deep, right in the center. She is 307 miles long, 118 miles wide at the widest point, and 91 miles wide at its narrowest. She is also considered the deadliest of the Great Lakes. Not because of shipwrecks, which there are many, many, but because of the really extreme weather systems that we have and the undertow. So we have the most drownings per year of any of the Great Lakes, with an average of about 35, with a high of 54 in 2020. There were 54 bodies pulled from the lake in 2020 because people were at the lakefront a lot. But she is very dangerous. She has claimed many souls. A modest estimation of the number of wrecks in recorded European history, starting in about the early 17th century, puts, again, the modest estimation of shipwrecks in Lake Michigan is 6,000, with some historians thinking that there's probably up to 10,000. It's just the records are a little difficult to parse through. So 10,000 vessels with an estimated 30,000 souls lost. The oldest record of human activity in the Great Lakes region begins around 8,000 years ago. But this is a really cool, like, kind of more recent discovery that I included. I think that there's an image in here of it.
And please pass packets around if you have one. Share with your neighbors.
Yeah, so we have some images included. I went a little crazy because there's some cool things. So if you feel like just kind of parsing through it as I go on, everything will kind of be in the order of the stories I tell. But on the second page, there is a image of a Ojibwe tribe, and then under that is an image of a Thunderbird petroglyph in Twin Bluffs, Wisconsin. So based on the petroglyph record and some pottery records that we have, the estimated human record goes back about 8,000 years. But there's a really cool story that I can't verify is true, but is interesting enough to tell, that in 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology at the Northwestern University of Michigan named Mark Hawley led a diving expedition and discovered some stone structures 40 feet below the surface, as well as a rock with a petroglyph of a mastodon, a woolly mammoth, which went extinct about 10,000 years ago, which pushes the human record back a couple thousand years, which is really, really cool. The other thing is that if that site is confirmed, they've also been keeping the site secret so that people don't go and mess with it. But that would have been where the natural lakeshore would have ended 10,000 years ago, which is now 40 feet underwater. So the lake is always changing. The lakeshore has shifted. The stone structure that they found is about a mile long of just rocks placed in a straight line. And his theory is that it might have been for herding. There are like a lot, if you try to look this up, there's a lot of people that are trying to call it the Lake Michigan Stonehenge, which would be really, really cool and weird if true, but actually they're just comparing the discovery of the stone structure. And if you look this up, there are a lot of images of it, supposedly, but actually all those images are of divers on the wreck of a steamship that has very long pillars. So it looks like they're in some sort of monolithic structure, but it is being spread falsely. But they did find a really cool site. There's images of the mastodon petroglyph, but there's not images of the stone structure. So anyway, I thought that was really, really cool that pushes the human record back another 2,000 years. Before the European colonization of the Great Lakes region, it was inhabited by the Chippewa, Menominee, Sauk, Fox, Winnebago, Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi tribes. Michigan is believed to be derived from the Ojibwe word Michigani, which means great water. There's also a map that I've included of a early French sort of general outline of North America, which actually calls Lake Michigan Lac Illinois, which is a French bastardization of Illini, which was the Confederation of Mississippi Valley Tribes. So beginning with that early French colonial history of the area, the formally recognized European discovery of the Great Lakes was in 1615 by Samuel de Champlain. I also can't pronounce things, so just don't worry about it. My Chicagoese is, not a fan of it. But Champlain was the founder of Quebec, and he discovered Lake Huron. In 1634, Jean Nicolet discovered Lake Michigan. In 1669, Joliet discovers Lake Erie, and in 1673, LaSalle roughly maps the Great Lakes with plans to build a ship and explore them further. Build a ship with local lumber, something that was not done previously. So in 1679, LaSalle completes building of the Griffin, the first tall ship to sail the Great Lakes, which sounds really, really good, but also is more of a cool legend, not something we can completely confirm. I've found little mentions of possibly some smaller ships that set sail first. There's something called the Leander that's hard to find information about, but for all intents and purposes, the legend goes that the first tall ship to sail the Great Lakes was the Griffin. She was about 60 feet long and had anywhere between a single or 7 cannons on board. She had elaborate wood carving details, including a lion-bodied, eagle-winged griffin figurehead. LaSalle set out from Niagara on August 7, 1679, on this maiden voyage, and sailed through Lake Erie and up Lake Huron. The ship docked at Mackinac Island, which was unsettled and completely barren at the time, between August 27th and September 12th. And then it set out again to eventually reach Rock Island, at the mouth of Green Bay. LaSalle decides that he's going to stay behind after they've filled the cargo with pelts and tokens and all the things that they were collecting on this first journey, possibly to avoid debtors that were waiting for him at Niagara. So he figured he would send the cargo along first and avoid that. And he sent the Griffin back the same route with a skeleton crew of 6 men and a cargo full of pelts, and the ship immediately disappeared. Was not heard from again. The entire crew disappeared with it. He actually believed that the crew probably unloaded the cargo and scuttled the ship to go inland and try to sell it themselves, because why not? It was the Wild West back then. And because this was the first tall ship to sail the Great Lakes, and because it disappeared so mysteriously 350 years ago, this has captivated people for a really, really long time. It's a fascinating story. Nobody knows what happened. And since it disappeared, people have been finding it. And it's kind of become the holy grail of Chicago shipwrecks, because everybody wants to find it. And a lot of people have claimed to find clues and that there's treasure on board and all these things. There are literally so many different accounts of people who think they have found the Griffin, but I have information about a very interesting one. In 1898, a lighthouse keeper named Albert Cullis claimed to have discovered a cave near an old wreck near his property, and after exploring the cave, he found 6 human skeletons, fur tokens, and French military buttons. So this story has a little bit more credibility because extensive laboratory testing for the time period was done on these objects up until the 1950s, but the results were inconclusive. But the French military buttons were dated at about the right time for it to be the Griffin. Also, interestingly, of the 6 human skeletons, one was known to be abnormally large, and matched the description of the Griffin's Captain Lucas, who was described as a giant of a man for the time period. The wreck actually washed away by 1942, and the rest of the artifacts were lost, save for a few pieces and bolts that are actually in local museums in the area. And it was never confirmed, but it's a really, really cool, interesting story about finding secret treasure and skeletons in a cave, which is very piratey and interesting. And, and since then, there have literally been dozens of other people claiming that they have found the wreck of the Griffin, including a very recent one that is kind of interesting because a wreck was found in fair condition of a ship that could be about that old, because there's very few that are actually as much as 350 years old. But again, never found, not confirmed. Is often seen, is a very common ghost ship because of her very memorable details, the Griffin figurehead, the two masts, red sails. So people think they find her, but they also think they see her quite often. Also notably, she did go down in the Lake Michigan Triangle, which I will get to much later. So one of the first victims of the Lake Michigan Triangle. So after this period, there is a boom in shipbuilding, beginning with the French and Indian War in 1754. In 1775, the British built a fort on Mackinac Island during the Revolutionary War, and the U.S. did not actually have full control over the Great Lakes region until the Battle of Lake Erie on September 10th, 1813. And in 1815, commercial activities were formally commenced. It was discovered shortly after that there were large stores of copper and iron in the area. There was also an influx of settlers for timber and lumber, but it was very, very new, and it was very unregulated, which meant that a lot of very illegal things happened, and a lot of people were trying to get rich without the knowledge of the U.S. government. So there were a lot of timber pirates at the time. They could clear acres of timber from federally owned lands and ship it across the lakes or down the Mississippi with no regulation. And this kind of Wild West era of the Great Lakes, I think, led to some larger-than-life personalities. So now I get to tell you a little bit about two of our greatest Lake Michigan real pirates. So learning about these guys has been super fun because I really hope that everybody goes home and tries to research these people, because everything that I'm about to tell you sounds made up, but this is probably the most factual stories I have to tell you, because there are a lot of records of these people's lives and their victims and the things that they did, versus a lot of the hearsay. I mean, there's a lot of hearsay too, because they had fearsome reputations. But anyway, I'll get into it. So the first of the great Lake Michigan pirates that I have to tell you about is King Jesse Strang of Beaver Island. I've included an image of him along with the Vory plates that he's known for. So a little bit about Jesse Strang's background, the Mormon King of Beaver Island. So from a very young age, Strang kept a detailed diary written in code, where he wrote that he felt fated to be a great leader of men. He looked up to people like Napoleon and, ironically, Caesar. The latter, yeah. He began a career as a lawyer, became a postmaster, kind of did a jack-of-all-trades things, which also seems kind of typical of these guys. Like, they kind of just moved around and saw where they landed, because they were very dynamic, charismatic individuals. And he eventually stumbled onto the early Mormon church when it was still headed by founder Joseph Smith. So Strang was a very gifted speaker, and he saw an opportunity and claimed to be a prophet, and within a month of joining the church, he was a church elder. Shortly after, Joseph Smith died very suddenly in 1844, and if anybody is vaguely familiar with this history, there was actually a big break in the early Mormon movement after his death because he had not named a successor. And there were a couple different people that were vying for the opportunity to be the new head of this early version of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Of course, Joseph Smith had been divinely ordained, so they were waiting for a divine message for who would lead the church. And very coincidentally, Strang was able to produce a letter from Smith naming him a successor, and also argued that he had been divinely ordained by angels. This was backed up by a discovery that he made of some ancient brass plates in a hillside in Wisconsin that were apparently the word of God, They also happen to be written in code that only he could translate. And about them, I have a quote from him. Well, it's a quote from the plates, but, you know. Behold, I, the Lord, have spoken it. I will give unto him the plates of the ancient records, which are sealed up, and he shall translate them unto you. And this shall be a witness between and those that serve me. And unto my servants who serve me faithfully, unto whom I will, shall he show the plates. And they shall be faithful witnesses unto me, and shall my words be established. Which absolutely sounds like the word of God to me. I don't know. So those plates have actually been lost, but there are pressings of them that still exist. So there's an image of those in the images that I've included for you. They're really cool, actually. There's like weird little pictures of Roman warriors and angels and weird little things in them. So the discovery of these plates and the letter from Joseph Smith's deathbed were not enough to cement his position, and there were unfortunately other prominent LDS leaders that were vying for this position, led by Smith's longtime confidant Brigham Young. They contested Strang's claim and the legitimacy of the evidence. This divided the movement, and Strang took a smaller faction, but still a couple thousand people, of devoted followers with him to the Great Lakes region to set up their own church. And Brigham Young instead founded Salt Lake City, and as the recognized second president of the Latter-day Saints movement, and it became what it is today because of him. It is of note, though, that while most of the other church elders followed Brigham Young, Strang actually had a lot of Smith's family as on his side, including one of his brothers, his three sisters, and their mother, Lucy Mack Smith, and a few other notable members. At the height of his power, he had 12,000 followers. So this is all before he declares himself king of Lake Michigan. So, yeah, you forgot that he becomes a pirate. Some of his followers and him go to Beaver Island in 1848. I've got a little map of that too. Beaver Island is an island that is 13 miles long, 6 miles wide at the very top of Lake Michigan. At first, when they showed up there, the Mormon presence was sort of an obnoxious minority to the people that were already settled on Beaver Island. But they started to seize property from non-Mormons, which they called Gentiles. They referred to themselves as saints. He didn't exactly declare himself king of the island, but he declared himself king of his church, the kingdom of God, which included the island, I suppose, where his followers were residing. And he eventually was able to overtake the island and a lot of the surrounding ports. His coronation, because of course, was on July 8th, 1850. It was witnessed by about 300 people, and it said that he wore a red flannel robe topped with a white collar and black speckles, like the ermine robes of European royals, and that he had a tin crown. He asserted his full authority over all the inhabitants, including a mandatory tithe to the king. Failure to meet his requirements or follow church rules would result in public whippings and seizure of property. One story goes that when word got around that he was declaring himself king and that there was going to be a coronation, a group of local fishermen tried to mob Strang's home in order to drive them out, only to have him fire a cannon on them to disperse them. So I talked about where Beaver Island is, blah, 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 blah. So being the king of the Church of God's Chosen People is a very handy justification for committing all kinds of piracy. This was also the heyday of the mineral rush, meaning there was a lot of trade in the area, and the position of the island right in the middle of the route down into Lake Michigan basically meant that they had access to all of the trading ships that were coming back and forth, and they could see it from the island. And they actually had a navy of 3 ships, as well as other things that they would seize. So it was a really ideal sort of strategic position to do the kinds of things that he started to do. Also, part of his divine revelation about settling there was that he, of course, changed the name of the island to St. James after himself, and also instituted polygamy, which earlier he had kind of been in contention with other members of the LDS about, but he changed his mind and had at least 5 recorded wives. One of many of Strang's crimes was he was accused of going into fishing settlements and stealing girls to bring them back to be wives of the Mormon Church. It gets dark. I mean, these people killed a lot of people. So, so as I said, thank you so much. Sorry, necessary. The 3 Mormon ships were the Dolphin, the Emmeline, and the Seaman. And
Stop
Get it
laughing.
out.
Stop laughing.
I mean, there was a lot of seamen, He was also in a position to control a lot of the local fishing industry, which is why he was kind of able to get a chokehold over all of these different settlements. He could literally starve people if he chose to cut off trade in the area or cut off fishing boats from getting through, which is why a lot of the Gentile population kind of had to cede to what he was doing. And soon, rumors accumulated of a crack in Lake Michigan. It's common for ships to just kind of disappear without a trace in winter months when the weather is difficult, but to have so many ships disappear in good sailing months of summer at this one particular area started to raise suspicion about what was going on there. But there would be no evidence. Dead men tell no tales. One ship that they think might have been a victim of his was the 152-foot two-masted brig Robert Willis that set out from Chicago to Buffalo with a cargo of wheat in 1853, only to disappear somewhere near Beaver Island. The ruthlessness of the Mormon pirates was the common thread in most of these stories. There was there's another story of a ship washing up during a storm on the shores of Beaver Island, and the crew were made to stand trial. Some argued to murder them outright, but it was instead decided that the ship would be cleared of any valuable cargo and the men set adrift. Which is, the cleaner way of murdering them, I suppose. So a lot of these stories also involved the act of moon cussing, which was the practice of luring ships to rocky shores at night with false lights, purposely crashing them, stealing the cargo, and then sinking them again. So that was kind of it seems like that was a pretty common practice amongst these people, not just the Mormons, but the other pirates that I have to talk about, where they just made a practice of luring these ships with false lights and then stealing everything on board and sinking them so that there would be no evidence. So it's literally impossible to figure out how many times they might have done this or what their actual, body count might have been. But definitely enough to have rumors circulating that this was a dangerous area to go. I have a story here that maybe sounds a little bit less credible, but who knows, about a time that they overtook a ship and murdered everybody on board except for the captain's 2 young daughters, which they took back with them. But one of the girls apparently jumped overboard and swam back to shore to alert a local community about what had happened. And the story goes that they stormed Strang's palace and were able to rescue her sister at gunpoint. Just, normal everyday Mormon stuff, I guess. But when not reigning over his empire, Jesse Strang was a industrious gentleman, and he also ran the only newspaper in the area, the Northern Islander. And in his paper, he, of course, disputed all of the crimes he was accused of, claiming that they were invented as political attacks against the church. His chokehold on the region could not go unnoticed forever, but the first attempt to end his reign was actually in 1851. The captain of the USS Michigan caught wind of what was happening and tricked Strang into coming on board with a couple members of his crew. They were detained and actually brought to Detroit to stand trial. They were tried for charges of mail robbery, counterfeiting, timber thieving, and tax evasion. But there was so little evidence, and also Strang was a lawyer and a highly gifted speaker, and they walked. So it was another couple years before anything kind of came of it again, but eventually he got so tyrannical that members of his church turned on him, and that's what led to his downfall. He was increasing taxes, the public whippings were getting out of hand, there were rumors of him just kind of doing away with anybody that dared speak against him. There was a member of his church, Thomas Bedford, who was accused of committing adultery and suffered 79 lashes in the public square, after which he became a sworn enemy of Strang's. So he started kind of rounding up dissenters, and they literally planned a mutiny. It's a point of contention whether they actually involved law enforcement in this plan, but I think they probably did. They couldn't just unofficially they didn't, but the way it all turned out was that on June 18th, 1856, it's believed that Bedford and another excommunicated follower, Dr. H.D. McCulloch, contacted the new captain of the USS Michigan, McBlair, and devised a plan to draw Strang out. The USS Michigan summoned Strang to the port, and then Bedford and McCulloch shot him multiple times in the back. They then immediately boarded the USS Michigan, asking for sanctuary. McBlair's assistance, again, is unconfirmed, but he did refuse to turn them over to the Mormon sheriff of the island, and instead dropped them off in Mackinac Island, where there was kind of a mock trial, and they were released as heroes, because they finally did away with the horrible King Strang of Beaver Island. He actually didn't succumb to his injuries for 3 weeks, and on his deathbed, he failed to name a successor, instead saying to await divine instruction, which did not come. So after he passed, the word circulated that this horrible tyrannical pirate king was finally gone, and that there was no named successor, and people from Mackinac Island and all the little port towns around kind of came down on the island to drive the rest of the Mormons out. And these people left in huge droves. They kind of jumped on any ship they could to get out of the area because they knew people were coming for them. They went to Chicago, they went to Detroit. There was a lot of small chartered boats that were just taking these people wherever they could get to for safety. And they kind of just got scattered across the country at that point. But when they did get to Beaver Island, they confiscated just warehouses full of stolen cargo that seemed to confirm that they had been committing acts of piracy for a really long time. They found barrels of food and things that were from missing vessels. They found, let me see, fine china, furniture, lumber, food suppliers from things not locally sold, things that had come from Chicago. So yeah, confirming that there was a lot of pillaging and sink shipping to be had. And that is the story of King James Strang of Beaver Island.
Wow, what? Very cool. Jeez.
So my next pirate is honestly just as interesting, but I'm skipping ahead about 100 years, or no, loosely. Not very much. I'm skipping ahead about 50 years. He was born in 1865, but his pirating career started a little bit later. I have to tell you about Roarin' Dan Seavey. He began sailing very early on. He joined the Navy at 13. It's said that he was also an extremely large man for the time period. I have seen everything from him being 6'1" to 6'5", which might have been part of his fearsome reputation that he spread about himself. But he was definitely a very large man, and it's unsurprising that he might have gotten away with joining the Navy at 13. After some time, he made his way to Milwaukee. He ended up settling in Marinette. He had a couple local saloons, and kind of settled there for a while. But then he left his family there and tried to join in on the Klondike Gold Rush in 1898. he was unsuccessful and returned to the Great Lakes region a few years later, penniless, and he was also a jack of all trades, somebody who was looking for opportunities, and he scraped together enough funds to start a small freight service out of Escanaba. He was able to purchase a small vessel, but she was really speedy, a 41-foot schooner that he called the Wanderer, and that was his like flagship pirate ship. It was said that the crew he assembled for this enterprise was full of roughnecks and reprobates, not the sort of men a legitimate captain would hire. About this time, he had also been working on building a reputation for himself as a very fearsome figure. He would go to port towns along Lake Michigan on these trade routes that he was chartered for and kind of go to different bars and pubs and stuff in these small towns and purposely start fights to win them and kind of create this reputation for himself as this very fearsome brawler. And that's where he got the nickname Roarin' Dan Seavey. And people would actually, it became like a gimmick, like, Dan Seavey killed someone at my bar. So it was really good for the reputation of everyone involved. But he, with the development of that reputation, there was also rumors of him taking to old-fashioned piracy to supplement his income. It was said that they would sneak into small harbors, steal anything that wasn't nailed down, and then turn it over in the next port they landed in. They also looted cargo, including livestock, ship's gear, lumber, and they very often would loot ships in small Michigan harbors and then head down to Chicago to sell it in black market ports where no questions were asked. Some rumors were even suggested that Seavey was involved in a so-called white slave trade, which was a sex trafficking problem that the state's attorney was dealing with in Chicago at the time. I have tried so hard to find out more information about this because obviously it's fascinating, and I've tried really hard to find out more about this like black market port trade that must have existed at the time in Chicago ports, because city officials had to have known about it, and they had to have known about this guy in particular and kind of let him get away with things for a certain amount of time. But obviously it's very difficult to find information about it. I just know that he was able to take this looted cargo and trade it in Chicago, no questions asked. So another revenue source for him was poaching venison. He had a island called Sumner Island that was kind of unofficially his property to poach off of. When a larger company called Booth Fisheries tried to formally take control of his territory, it said he chased down one of their fishing boats and sunk it with cannon fire, which then ended the dispute. He was also accused of moon cussing, which again is luring ships to the rocks with false lights. I don't know how this would work, but something that I've come upon is that a way that they would do this would be to tie a lantern to an animal so that while like the cow or whatever it was like grazing and moving around, it would kind of mimic like a light floating on the water. So that's one way to sink ships. And then the moon cussing.
Yeah, I'm gonna know this girl's question.
Moon cussing.
Thank you.
So the most famous story of Roarin' Dan Seavey, which was also his downfall, was the time he stole a schooner called the Nellie Johnson from a port in Grand Haven. So the story goes that he won the Nellie Johnson fair and square in a poker game at a pub, which is, you know, how you trade boats, I guess. But the owner backed out, and he decided to take it by force because he believed that he had fairly won it. So sometime in early June of 1908, there's a couple different versions of this story, that he either went onto the ship with a keg of whiskey and got everybody drunk and then threw them overboard, or that he lured them to a local pub and bought them all rounds of drinks. And these guys were like, yeah, okay, I'll let you buy me some drinks, I guess. But regardless, his crew was able to actually commandeer the ship and make away with it. And the captain that owned the ship formerly set off... sorry, I got confused there for a moment. But so he took the Nellie Johnson with the Wanderer and made off for Chicago to sell her cargo. But the captain of the Nellie Johnson had reported him to the authorities for piracy, which they couldn't ignore, even if they knew who Dan Seavey was unofficially. So he was made aware that he had been reported for stealing the ship, and he actually had to turn away from Chicago because he realized he wouldn't be able to get rid of the cargo there. So then he was on the run, and authorities were looking for the ship. So Seavey's crew sailed the Nellie Johnson and the Wanderer to Frankfurt, and they hid the ship behind a small island on the Betsy River. On June 20th, U.S. Deputy Marshal Thomas Currier, aboard a cutter called the Tuscarora, under Captain Preston H. Uberoth, was tasked with apprehending Seavey and reclaiming the Nellie Johnson. And this started one of the biggest, definitely the biggest manhunts in the area up until that point. They got like everything that was considered the Coast Guard up until that point involved. All of the local lighthouses along Lake Michigan and life-saving stations were told to keep an eye out for this missing ship. On June 24th, a telegram was received from Frankfurt saying that someone had spotted the Nellie Johnson, that she had been spotted in the harbor, and the Tuscarora was on its way there. Seavey and his crew then abandoned that ship and jumped on the Wanderer to try to evade the Tuscarora, and they actually sailed right past it, and were able to evade her for 7 miles. And I don't think there's a way to accurately describe the idea of like a pirate ship chase on Lake Michigan out of a port in Frankfurt. But if you can imagine a little schooner trying to outrun a steamship cutter for 7 miles, there's also some versions of the story that cannon fire was actually exchanged between them, and that the Wanderer didn't stop until cannon fire was deployed. But regardless, they caught up to the ship. Seavey was arrested and taken on board. And he quipped that he only left a half hour earlier, he would have gotten away with it. So they take this guy in, they take him back to Chicago to stand trial for piracy, and obviously the newspapers of the time had a field day. I mean, this was amazing. Like, the newspapers in Detroit, the newspapers in Chicago, everyone was like, pirate ship chase at sea, like all this crazy stuff. And when he actually got to Chicago, he must have had some really good representation or some friends somewhere in the city, like I said, because the charge was changed from piracy to the unauthorized removal of a vessel on which one had formerly been a seaman, meaning that because at some point he had sailed on the Nellie Johnson as a crew member, technically it was just like a member of crew taking the ship without permission versus an act of piracy. Yeah, a joyride basically, versus piracy, which was still a hangable offense, even though nobody had hung for piracy ever in Chicago. But all of this was for naught because by a very strange coincidence, the owner of the Nellie Johnson failed to appear in court, and so all charges were dropped.
Wow.
I wonder what happened to him. So this meant that they all walked free. The newspapers after that happened were insane. Like, you can find a lot of these things in the archives, like people reporting on this. Like, it was the best story to, I mean, it's insane. It still sounds insane today. So after Seavey walked free, notable Pirates of the Caribbean would do this thing where they would be granted their freedom in exchange for service to the crown after they were captured, or they would turn in some of their crewmen in exchange for their own heads. And in this tradition, after his trial, Seavey was actually appointed a U.S. Deputy Marshal.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm completely serious. And he was tasked with closing down the illegal whiskey and venison poaching trades. He was really good at this. And he had a fierce reputation for enforcing the law. And there's one saloon in Nobbinway that boasted a story that Seavey had beaten a whiskey peddler to death there, which, you know, good for business, like I said. And he was able to retire from being a U.S. Marshal and died in a nursing home in Peshtigo at the age of 84. Yeah.
He died. What year?
You know what? I'd have to do the math on that. Let me see. I actually don't know. He was born in 65 and he died at 84.
Was he a bachelor the whole time?
No, he had a family at one point before he went for the gold rush and he abandoned them. 'Cause, so he had 2 daughters somewhere. Yeah, in Marinette. I'm sure that they weren't very proud of that. Or maybe they were, I don't know, Yeah, so those are the 2 most infamous Lake Michigan pirates that I couldn't have made up those stories if I wanted to. And it's really, really cool because I think people don't realize too that like I always think about like all the tall ships and the trading networks and people coming from the ocean on the St. Lawrence Seaway that like at one point being in Chicago meant that there were tons of tall ships with sails docking in the ports bringing things from Europe, from all over the world and then down the Mississippi distributing it everywhere else. Like imagining pirate ships and tall ships on Lake Michigan is just amazing and incredible. And if anybody gets the opportunity to see the tall ships when they're at Navy Pier, they do that every few years, and it's really cool. So yeah. So now that I've talked about pirates, the rest of my talk is about some more Lake Michigan folklore that's less rooted in historical fact and more in local legend. There have obviously been a lot of shipwrecks there, and a really cool thing about Lake Michigan is that it's so cold that most of the shipwrecks in the lake are perfectly preserved. The wood just doesn't break down. So the reason people think that they've found the Griffin once in a while is because even though that ship is 350 years old, she would still exist perfectly if they happen to find her, depending on where she is. And they find ships all the time that are in perfect condition. There are 12 preservation sites in Lake Michigan, which are chartered like shipwreck sites that you can go to and dive down and kind of dive around the shipwrecks. I hope that I can do that someday. I'll probably never be able to afford it, but it sounds really cool. Patty and I actually did a really cool thing this last summer where we decided to do the Lake Michigan Triangle, and we drove from Chicago up through Wisconsin, down through Michigan, the whole circle of the lake. And we did... Yep, it was really, really cool. We stayed in some really shady places. And the coolest thing we did was we did a shipwreck tour that wasn't Lake Michigan. It was officially Lake Superior, but it was so cool because I knew theoretically that these ships would be perfectly preserved, but actually seeing them and seeing like nails on the hull is the coolest thing in the world. So I think of most of those ships as ghost ships because they still exist even though they've been sunk unofficially for so long. And that's how I'm going to segue into talking about some famous ghost ships of Lake Michigan. So these are all stories of famous wrecks that have appeared as apparitions after their sinkings. Most of them are just honestly really terrible disasters, which I think always lends itself to kind of becoming a part of local legend, and I think lends itself to the imagination of like becoming a ghost story. Like people want to see these things and they want to see it continue, but also they were just horrible tragedies. So the first one I have to talk about is the collision of the Augusta and the Lady Elgin in 1860. Before the Eastland disaster, this was the worst maritime disaster in recorded history at that time for America. So a schooner called the Augusta collided with the wooden passenger steamship, the Lady Elgin, who was carrying about 450 passengers out of Milwaukee. She had been one of Chicago's premier passenger ships for 9 years at that point. There's a lot of pictures of the Chicago port of that time where you see the Lady Elgin docked in the port. The schooner was unlit and was unable to avoid the collision because of gale force winds that it picked up and made impact with the side of the Lady Elgin at 2:30 a.m. She actually, or the schooner, talking about ships is weird, but one thing is that ships are usually female because they're supposed to be wives of ocean deities. So it's thought that if you name your ship, a lady name, then it's a bride of Poseidon or whatever. So that's where that superstition comes from. But anyway, the Augusta collided with the Lady Elgin in this storm system that had started up. And they thought that they hadn't done any damage to the ship, but they were damaged. So they turned back toward shore. And the Lady Elgin had actually been holed under the waterline, and it was 2:30 in the morning. She broke apart 20 minutes after the collision and sunk almost immediately. So there were hardly any survivors. Like, people were in their beds. There was no opportunity to even know what was happening before it was already too late. So there were only 2 lifeboats on the entire ship that ended up being deployed, 18 survivors on those boats, and then there was a raft of 14 people that was recovered later that morning, but those were basically the only known survivors of the some 400 and something people that were thought to be on the ship. The ship went down and also lost all of its manifests and logs, so there was no actual way to know exactly how many people were lost and who had been on it, but a lot of people that had gone missing in the next few days. The Tribune was constantly publishing victims as they were named, but at least 300 people were killed. So many Irish politicians were on board the ship that it is actually credited with shifting power in Milwaukee from the Irish to the Germans. So, yeah. At least 100 bodies washed up and were brought to Chicago in makeshift morgues, and the ones that were left unclaimed were buried in the city cemetery, which used to be Lincoln Park, in a mass grave. So who knows how many of them are still there, because that's what we used to do back then. So there are a couple different ghost stories that are connected to this story. People think that they have seen the Lady Elgin herself off the beach in Winnetka, where a lot of the bodies washed ashore. There's a particular apparition called the Lady in Black that is thought to be a body of a wealthy woman who had washed ashore wearing a black dress with all her jewels. And somewhere between being recovered on the beach and ending up at the corners, all of her jewelry disappeared. So it's thought that she's hanging around because she's very bitter about that. And this story was largely forgotten by the time the Eastland disaster happened in 1950. If you're unfamiliar, it's like a very interesting story. It happened on the river and not the lake, so I can't really talk about it right now. But it was a huge disaster. A ship that was about to leave the port here and embark out onto Lake Michigan sunk before she even reached the lake in the river, and 844 people were killed. Just an interesting side bit about that story is that so many bodies were being pulled out of the river that they had to turn a lot of buildings in the loop into makeshift morgues. And one of them was the eventual site of Harpo Studios. So there's a local story that the Oprah studios and sets were haunted by victims of the Eastland disaster. So that's cool. Anyway, but by the time the Eastland disaster happened, people had forgotten about the Lady Elgin. So there was kind of a resurgence of stories about her at the time that occurred, because it had kind of disappeared from the public memory. And we don't really hear about it today, even though it was this huge disaster, because the Eastland kind of eclipsed it later on. Another ghost ship that has been seen. I have a really cool image in the guide that Patty and I have used on tours before, because it's just, the illustration itself is really interesting. I really like it because the illustration is this like haunted, ghostly, tall ship, but the Chikora was actually a steamer that didn't even have masts. It just is more interesting if you make it look spooky and piratey, you know? But she was a steamer built for service between St. Joseph and Chicago, and she was sunk in 1895 with all hands on deck lost. Parts of the wreck washed ashore in South Haven. And there is a story that I can't confirm, but it's really interesting, that a bottle washed up on shore somewhere about a week later, and there was a note that said, "Chikora engines broke, drifted into trough of sea. We have lost all hope. She has gone to pieces. Goodbye, McClure, engineer." Which very well could be real, because things like that did definitely happen, and I have found other instances where like notes were discovered, or like things were like taken from hulls where there were still manifests of the crew describing the ship's sinking. And the article that I have included for you is from a Tribune article. I think it's 1929 that it was printed. And 26? Okay. 06, okay. I think the bogey is maybe later. But anyway, it's an article about people in Edgewater and Evanston seeing the Chicora off of the beach and it appearing as this sort of ghostly glowing apparition. And so many people reported this that it made it into the paper as kind of an interesting local phenomenon. And I've looked in the Tribune archives for a lot of these kind of like local interest stories about like supernatural myths and legends, and the thing that I think is really funny about them is that they almost always include a local policeman to add credibility. Every single time. So this one, somewhere in the article, it's like officer so-and-so, whose beat is between the hours of early candlelight and dawn, has seen the Chicora himself and tried to like hunt it down or whatever. And they'll interview these guys to kind of lend credibility. This story too, though, is really interesting because so many people reported seeing an apparition that they believed was the Chicora, that they involved Northwestern University professors who tried to tell some story about how it might be electrical phenomenon or something. So I do think that a lot of people must have seen something for this to have been investigated and kind of become a well-known ghost ship sighting from Chicago. Another cool thing about it is that people who saw the apparition of the Chicora also claim to be able to see the figures of crewmen on the hull of the ship. Another ship that I'm not going to talk about at length, but is just a really interesting occurrence and has also been seen, I think, because it was such a famous thing that people think they see it all the time, was the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975. The really haunting thing about the Edmund Fitzgerald is that they were able to radio about what was happening all the way up until the end. So they were sending frequent radio messages ashore, and there was a final log at 7:10 that was basically, it wasn't even a like we've lost all hope. It was something like we're taking on water or something like that, and then it just cut out, and she disappeared with a crew of 29.
It was sad.
And was that, I'm sorry, was that 1970?
75.
Okay,
Yeah, and that was so much in recent memory that actually really changed a lot of laws about how like naval ships function and safety, and also like pooling wrecks in, because we just would let ships go down and then leave them there like graveyards for other ships to be like, what the hell happened? You're just gonna send me by that thing and not tell me anything about it? Like, okay. 1975.
And it was sad. It was sad.
Mm-hmm.
And the great ship went down.
Yeah. The Edmund Fitzgerald was 75, but a lot of people have claimed to also have seen it. Again, appearing as kind of a glowy apparition on the coastline. Yeah, there's one more ghost ship in particular that I thought I'd mention just because this really interests me, because this ship went down, but all hands on deck survived. Everyone on the ship was rescued, and yet people have seen it as an apparition. And I don't know what that implies about ghost ships, but maybe it implies something spooky about Lake Michigan. I don't know. But the Ella Ellenwood was built in 1869 and sunk around 1900. It was so close to shore that all of the passengers were able to get to the shore safely, and the ship was just left kind of off the coast where she sank. But so many people have seen her that I find that really fascinating, a ghost ship with no souls lost on it. So that's just a interesting side bit. Earlier I had mentioned the Lake Michigan Triangle. You guys, maybe some of you know that there is a Lake Michigan Triangle, which is exactly like the Bermuda Triangle, except apparently statistically worse. I think it's Ludington, Bennington Harbor, and Green Bay is the corners of it. I need to confirm that again. Manitowoc. I just want to see her for a second. Yeah, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, Ludington, and Benton Harbor. And within that triangle, there is just a statistically very high concentration of ships lost, disappearances, planes mysteriously going down and disappearing. And that is from the earliest recorded colonial history of the area to today. There is also a huge amount of UFO sightings in the area. So this is where it gets kind of like, this is all stuff that I'm going to report, but I will not claim that any of this is factual. It's just incredibly interesting. Some different triangle occurrences. There was the Rose Bell, which was a ship found with no passengers in 1921. The ship was fine, but all the passengers had mysteriously disappeared. Nobody was ever recovered. There's a couple different stories that are kind of like that. It's really spooky. Like, they'll find a ship that's just been abandoned and the passengers are lost. There are other reports of missing crewmen. There's one story about a captain going missing from his chambers with the door locked from the inside. There was a Hope College student, Stephen Kubacki, who was spotted sailing off the shoreline near Saugatuck in 1978. He disappeared and was discovered a year later, 700 miles away, with no memory of the incident. That's also a really interesting thing, just like side note, if people are into spooky stuff and anybody is familiar with the Missing 411, which is kind of a unofficial log of like weird disappearances in national parks where people go missing and then are found like miles away with no explanation for how they got there. So I feel like that maybe is like a similar connection. One of the most famous Lake Michigan Triangle disappearances was the 1950 disappearance of United Flight 2501. It disappeared over Lake Michigan without a trace after the pilot had requested landing due to an electrical storm that was not reported from anywhere else. So that's the most famous plane disappearance, but there's actually a lot of like smaller plane disappearances. I know there's a naval base in Glenview, or like a small airport, and some of those planes have disappeared in that area. There's actually quite a few stories of like small manned pilots disappearing in that area of the lake. On to UFO sightings. There is a very famous event in 1994 where hundreds of calls were made to 911 about mysterious lights seen over Ludington that moved from over the town and the port out over the lake, apparently heading down towards Chicago. And it was described as anything from 4 to 6 lights that were moving in formation and forming triangles. This was also confirmed by the National Weather Service station in Muskegon, which is close to Ludington, also the birthplace of Buster Keaton. Or not birthplace, home. Somebody at the National Weather Service station was also able to confirm that they had seen these lights and they didn't have an explanation for it. So the Ludington lights have continued to be studied, and that was a really, really high concentration of tons of people calling 911 and calling the news stations to say that so many people had been witnessing the same thing. But MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, the chapter that they have in Michigan, has recorded 2,789 UFO sightings from 2010 to 2020. Wow. So just in the last 10 years, that's how many sightings they have received from people claiming to see UFOs over Lake Michigan. UFOs meaning anything from what they think is craft to just mysterious lights that they can't explain. There was a event in 2006 called Patty's Triangle, because
I'm sorry, what's it called?
Patty's Triangle
It's whose triangle?
It's so called because a Lansing resident named Patty Blackburn caught it on film. There's a blurry picture of a couple different lights in a triangle formation. There was also an event in 2016 where something called the Paulding light was observed by a lot of different people in the Upper Peninsula. So that is just some of the creepy stuff that has happened supposedly in the Lake Michigan Triangle. And I recommend checking it out. Some other just supernatural Lake Michigan stories that I have to share quickly because I'm running out of time. There's so many cool things that I could talk about, but I'll try to just run through a few of the other things that I had wanted to share. A really cool story that we've also talked about on our tour is the story of Diana of the Dunes. This is an apparition that would appear to people as a nude woman bathing on the shoreline or running across the beach. The really cool thing about this is that she was 100% real, and we actually have a lot of history about her. So the Diana of the Dunes legend is based on the life of Chicago resident Alice Mabel Gray. She was born in Chicago in 1881. Her parents were a doctor and a school teacher. She was well educated. She attended the University of Chicago. And after a few years, she felt stifled by city life and felt that it was not supporting of intellectual women. So she decided to abandon her life and go live on a hut in the Indiana Dunes. And I've got pictures of her and her hut if you want to see it. It's really, really neat. She constructed this structure out of driftwood, and she didn't just completely like live in the hut. She would travel into town, she would go to the library, and she would also sometimes travel back to Chicago to go to museums. But for the most part, she lived the life of a hermit on the beach in the Indiana Dunes in this driftwood hut of hers, just reading and eating berries, and honestly, I mean, great, right? And people would see her. So of course this legend of the bizarre, naked, wild woman running along the beach spread, and she became a really infamous figure. And due to her notoriety, people started to come to interview her, which kind of became a problem for her. But she was able to kind of turn it to her advantage, and during this time, there was a lot more industry happening along like Gary, like all of the sort of like steel towns that were popping up and developing in that time. And she was a huge proponent of preserving the dunes as they were. And she used her infamy as Diana of the Dunes to become a activist and a speaker. And in 1917, she actually gave a speech at the Art Institute about the preservation of the dunes. And it led directly to them creating the Indiana Dunes State Park. Yeah. Yeah. So she passed away in her hut on the beach in 1925, and people since then have reported seeing an apparition of a nude woman running along the beach and bathing in the waves. A really cool account that Patty and I have happened upon before is one where the apparition appears nude except for wearing a ton of like beautiful jewelry, which also maybe like checks out. She seems like a cool lady. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past her. There is a annual Diana of the Dunes festival held in Chesterton in her honor. But yeah, I couldn't condense her life into a paragraph, but she's honestly really, really cool. And everybody should learn more about her. Seaweed Charlie, he crawls out of the lake and into the Evanston Cemetery once in a while. You know, there's all these different figures that are like beach shore apparitions that kind of move from the water inland that people have reported. Seaweed Charlie in particular appears on the shoreline and crawls into the Evanston Calvary Cemetery. Some think that he is a downed World War II aviator that might have disappeared in the Lake Michigan Triangle. And there is some theories that is where the term creeping Charlie comes, which is a weed that people in the area deal with. I was going to talk about Mothman. I'm running out of time. I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, Mothman, I have to just mention a few things about the totem pole, and then I'll end on the tunnels. Obviously people see Mothman in Chicago a lot. I have some like things to say about like Mothman sightings and old Ojibwe Thunderbird sightings, which I don't know. But moving on to another story about the Ojibwe people is the Addison totem pole. Everybody has probably seen it, but I don't know if anybody knows the history of it. It is located on the beach, or not on the beach, but on the trail near the golf course at Addison. And it is officially known as Quanusila, the Thunder Maker. The original was first seen at an installation of native art at the 1893 Columbian Exposition, where a village was erected in Jackson Park. It was in the private collection of James L. Kraft of Kraft Foods until he donated it to the city to be erected in that spot in 1929. And I've included an image of its unveiling ceremony in 1929. By the 80s, tribe representatives came and saw the pole in disrepair and attempted to reclaim it. They were not successful because that's how these things go, and instead the Kraft family reclaimed it and commissioned an artist to make a replica, and the replica was unveiled in 1986, which is the one that is there. The actual original pole was not returned to its tribe. It is instead in the garden of the Craftwood Mansion in Wisconsin. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick. A cool story about the totem pole that I remember as like a kid in Chicago is that there was this story that the faces on it would change when a bad storm was coming. So I always remembered that, and that's what led me to looking into it. And then finally, I think I'm really running on time here, but it's so good. I'm going to end with a short tidbit about the first Lake Michigan tunnel. So this is really the deepest, darkest Lake Michigan story. Everyone knows that Chicago has a really complicated tunnel system. We use the tunnel system to reverse the river. We are still constantly creating tunnel systems. But the first tunnel dug under the lake was actually constructed in 1864 to 1866. It was proposed because of how terrible the cholera outbreaks in Chicago was. So they were like, what if we are able to pump water from further out into the lake so that it can get here without being pumped full of disease? So this was proposed by Ellis Chesborough in 1863. And the initial project cost about $7 million today, $380,000 at the time. And literally what they did, I included pictures of this because it's just so fascinating to me, is that they constructed the tunnel in two parts. It is 40 feet under the surface of the lake. Not 40 feet under the surface, but 40 feet under the rock of the lake. So they dug through the limestone, starting with the tunnel that leads out, and then later constructing the tunnel from the crib down. And the two different tunnel systems met in the middle when they were finished. And when they met in the middle, they were only off by 7 inches in 1866. So it's just an incredible feat of engineering. This was dug by people pulling mules through a tunnel in pitch darkness 40 feet under the lake. I mean, it's just, I used to have nightmares about this. Like, it's so interesting, and it must have been such hard work. And I know for a fact that people definitely died doing it, but for the most part, they were Irish immigrants, so it was like, whatever, we'll just get some new ones. At the very, very end, when they met the two tunnels, Ellis Chesborough and some other Chicago elites actually went down to like finish it and unveil it. And then they were able to pump water from 2 miles out into the lake from the initial crib into the city. Yeah, I have found some really cool things about people sneaking into that original tunnel, which is not in use anymore. They built a new tunnel in the 1890s, and then they've been constructing tunnels since. Chicago has had 9 cribs, 2 are currently active. But you can sneak into the tunnel systems if you really want to. So I know for
Next week.
not to send anybody into the FBI's most wanted list, but I will say that there might be a accessible doorway from the North Avenue entry under LSD to the Chess Pavilion. If you see like a really, really old door, if you open it, it might lead to a ladder, and that might lead to the original lake tunnel. I don't know. Like, I've heard people do it, so whatever. I don't know if it's true or not. So anyway, I'm going to force you to let me read something because I wanted to end on this note so that it makes sense. So I have a short paragraph to read from Ben Heck's 1001 Afternoons in Chicago, which is something that has been really important to me. and that everybody should read because it's beautiful. And this is from a short story, The Lake. Another reason why people grow sad when they look at the water of the lake is perhaps that the lake offers them an escape from the tawdry, nagging little responsibilities of the day that go with being a citizen and a breadwinner. Not that it invites to suicide, quite the reverse. It invites to living, to doing something that has a sweep to it, that has a swagger to it, to setting sail for strange ports where strange adventures await. So, as the IC trains rush their thousands to work and home again, the citizens and breadwinners let their imaginations gallop toward a faraway horizon. And these imaginations come galloping back again, and the breadwinners are saddened by a memory. Yes, they were for a moment rovers, egad, swashbucklers, gentlemen and ladies of fortune, free of the rigmarole burdens that keep them on the IC treadmill. And now they are again passengers, going home to go to work again tomorrow.
Oh, that's lovely.
All right, now I'm going to take my break. Thanks. What do I have to do?
I have a very small, short announcement, which is please be patient with the credit card reader tonight, as it is struggling very hard. So if you have a card open at the bar, please consider walking to the back to close your tab. Over the course of our Q&A period, which will now commence. So please raise your hand if you have a question. And Sam, please repeat the question before answering for our online audience.
Could you repeat the name of the book and the author?
Oh, yes. So this is 1001 Afternoons in Chicago by Ben Hecht, the screenwriter. But this was a series of little Tribune prose poems he did in the 20s that are all just kind of like short stories about Chicago. They're really cool.
Any other questions?
And I just wanted to add to that, because I haven't read that one, but I read another one. Ben Hecht has, there have been movies, he was a screenwriter.
Yeah, he won the first Oscar for
Right,
screenwriting.
and there are some movies, and there's always a Chicago connection, or they are set here. And so I recommend any of his books, or the silent movies, some of them were at the time, but yet just fascinating. So I really appreciated that you read from that. So thank you.
I have two comments from our online audience. The first is Lake Michigan Mormon Pirates was not covered on this season of TLC's Sisters' Wives. Do you know why? That was my favorite comment, though. The actual question is, why is it considered a sea and not a lake? Please repeat.
Why would it be considered a sea and not a lake? Size. I don't know the exact dimensions of dimensions, but there's a threshold that makes something big enough to be a sea, and they are all big enough to be seas, technically. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, what?
Oh,
you.
What kind of, is there like a systematic effort to find all of the shipwrecks in Lake?
Is there a systematic effort to find all of the shipwrecks? I wouldn't say systematic, but it attracts a lot of different people who are into this kind of thing. Like the last guy that says he found the Griffin is literally some guy that just that's what he does. I don't know how, but he's rich enough to just dive and look for shipwrecks all the time. So there's definitely a lot of people who have made that their careers. Probably the same people that provide the charters for leisure diving of the wrecks, I assume. But there's quite a lot of underwater archaeology. Yeah.
Love.
Yes.
Do you know, with the triangle, do you know if many of the stories came from, say, like August to December, and that would be a time when the lake's weather and tides and rips are really bad, and have they ever tried to explain the triangle?
Explanations of the triangle and seasonal weather patterns. I would say that has to be true. I don't know that anybody has tried to explain it because honestly it's cooler to say that there's a mysterious triangle. But, I mean, I said before that it was always more mysterious when ships went missing in the summer, so it was probably more likely to be piracy because it is just very common for ships to sink in bad weather patterns. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure the same is true, that there's a higher concentration of sightings of stuff. I know that the Chicora was only seen in winter. She was only seen on snowy days, and that was attributed to, like, that's when she sunk, but also on a misty, snowy day, you're more likely to think you see an apparition, you know? So I would say that I just think that's probably true.
Well, on our beaches, early fall is a very dangerous time as far as riptides and things, and people should not be swimming in the lake, and that's why I wonder, because this is an Indian summer issue. You know.
And she swims in the lake. She does. She'll swim like 30 miles. She swims in the lake. She's a nut.
You had a question?
Oh yeah, I do actually. Mine is very, very basic. Mine is very basic. Could you define a pirate?
Could I define a pirate? I know that there's definitely an actual definition of this, but someone who steals a ship.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes?
Do you know if there's any Mormons still on Beaver Island, or what's going on in Beaver Island today?
I don't think, are there any Mormons still on Beaver Island? I don't think there are Mormons, but I will say that from what I've looked into, there is a lot of lingering presence of James Strang. People have, like, changed the name of their hotels to the James Strang, and there's plaques of him everywhere, and I mean, it's kind of the coolest thing that's ever happened there. So there's definitely, like, a presence and a knowledge of him.
But it's still an inhabited island?
It's still an inhabited island, yeah. People live there, but now they have, like, driveways and stuff, and, you know.
There are campgrounds and stuff? I said there are also campgrounds, and it's a beautiful natural area.
Yeah, we got to see a little bit of it.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So other than, I'm guessing, the Chicago History Museum, is there any other local or, you know, in your research that you've done, museum or place that might have artifacts or things that can be visible to the public that you
I
would
have
recommend?
a great recommendation for this. Unfortunately, it's not in Chicago, but when we talked about doing a trip around Lake Michigan, the goal of it was actually for me to get to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum, which, Patty, do you remember where it is?
It's Paradise,
yes.
Michigan.
It's in Paradise, which has a great sign that says "Entering Paradise." It's right at the tippy top of Lake Michigan, right by Beaver Island. And we went there, and it was super cool. And the coolest thing about it is that they have a huge collection of artifacts recovered from the Edmund Fitzgerald. I'm talking like plates, uniforms, I mean, so much stuff that I didn't even know was there, and it was really, really cool to see it. It also, the museum was built on the location of the lighthouse that functioned there, so it's kind of a combination of the Shipwreck Museum and the Lighthouse Museum that you can also go in, which is really cool. I didn't even get to talk about lighthouses, but I could do a whole lecture on haunted lighthouses.
Next time.
Thank you.
There's a
We have time for a couple more questions. I wanted to ask a good one from online. What's the deal with lake monsters?
Okay, I ran out of time, but I have a little bit to say about this. The question was, what is the deal with lake monsters? So Lake Michigan doesn't have its own particular lake monster. Some of the other Great Lakes actually do. But besides the Mothman and the Thunderbird, something that I have happened upon is stories that are probably white sturgeon, because sturgeon is the largest thing that lives in the lakes, and adult sturgeon can get to be 6 to 8 feet long. So when European settlers came to the area, they heard stories from the indigenous people that there were creatures in the lake that could capsize a boat, because an 8-foot long fish can definitely capsize a canoe. And the local tribes actually relied heavily on sturgeon fishing and had sturgeon festivals. Sturgeon spawn in the rivers and then go out into the lake when they are giant, monstrous adults. And they're scary. They're dinosaurs. They haven't changed in millions of years, and they're really scary looking things. There's a picture of one in my thing. If you want to look at it, it looks like a dinosaur fish. So that's kind of, I think, the most interesting Lake Michigan lake monster that you might happen upon today. One more question? Uh-huh.
So, I know you said Lake Michigan's very cold, but it's not the coldest of the Great Lakes, right?
That I'm actually not
Well,
sure about.
Superior.
Because when you were saying about stuff being preserved, I remember hearing something about Superior.
Superior would make sense to be the coldest because it's
Superior's
also the
definitely-
largest.
it's definitely-
Largest,
It's definitely
okay.
the coldest,
So-
yeah.
But-
And it freezes solid.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of it doesn't freeze, because I've walked on it, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Please give it up for Sam.
Hot dog! Really good. Really good.
Thank you all for listening to me tell stories about terrible things that have happened in Lake Michigan.
As a friendly reminder, the only way we are able to pay our speakers, which we do, is with your generous donations. So
Yay.
if you guys have some cash, credit cards, whatever, we have QR codes on your way out. There's a tip bucket. Please be patient again with the credit card reader as you close out your bar tabs. And we'll see you guys back here next week. Make sure you grab your tickets. Next week will
What's next
be
week?
Tales of the Chicago Stage, some amusing stories of performers gone rogue and other such tales. So come back next week and see you
I
then.
love it.
Thank you.
Really good.
Yeah, it is every week.
And I'm a
I didn't post next week because I forgot about Lake.
Oh, just so good.
I was gonna do it to some,
Well, I thought I was